Yes. The irony is that tonight we're learning about different famous Jewish women,
That's funny.
and tonight we don't have any women. It's just us here. So actually, it's funny because I wanted to start with the joke, and I think the joke will be a little bit more appreciated if there's no women. The women might not like it as much.
Well, Karen is listening.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's okay. I grew up with brothers.
Okay, before we start, okay.
Every human being comes out of a woman,
Right,
except for Eve. She
right,
came out of a woman.
right.
One isn't kind of known as the mother of all humanity. What did she ever?
Yeah, technically she was a piece of him. It wasn't even
Yeah,
according to the Talmud, actually, it sounds like they were kind of two full bodies that were kind of glued together on the back. That's what it sounds like in the Talmud.
pretty cool.
So the joke is like this. So there was a husband, one day he's sitting on the couch, he's reading the paper, and there's in the paper, there's suddenly they announced there was this new study. They discovered that women talk more than men. So he's all they talk more than men. They talk a lot more. So he's all excited. He gets up. He goes. He runs to show his wife. He finally something that he was always complaining about. It's finally proven. So he gets up. He reads it to his wife. Look, men speak an average of 15,000 words a day. Women speak 30,000 words a day. So the wife is like silent for a minute, and then she says, "Oh, that's because we have to repeat everything." So the husband says, "What?" So
Yeah.
that's the joke.
That's funny.
I
So
like it.
that being said, so let's learn about we're gonna spend the rest of tonight learning about the positive qualities that women have, women of valor, exactly. So let's actually start with that. It's a very famous thing. We actually say this the Jewish custom in many communities is we read this every Friday night before we make Kiddush. The true meaning of the proverb it's really as an analogy to speak about the Torah, but it's also a nice in other words the analogy is true as well. It speaks about a lot of qualities about the woman of valor. So let's read it. Who's should Lee, are you able to read it?
Yes. Okay. You want me to read all the way down to the bottom there?
Yeah, what is it? It's like 18 verses or something.
I can do that.
20 verses, 22.
All right. From Proverbs, who can find the woman of valor? She is worth far more than pearls. Her husband trusts in her, he lacks no gain. She treats him with goodness, never with evil, all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works it eagerly with her hands. She is like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is still night, gives food to her household, and sets out the task for her maids. She considers a field and buys it. From her earnings she plants a vineyard. She girds her loins with strength and flexes her arms. She realizes that her enterprise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands on the spindle and her palms grasp the distaff. She holds her hand to the poor and extends her hands to the destitute. She does not fear for her household in the frost, for her entire household is clothed warmly in scarlet. She makes her own tapestries. Her garments are of fine linen and purple. Her husband is well respected at the city gates, as he sits with the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. She supplies the merchants with belts. I need to go up a little bit. Okay.
Number
Stre-
16.
16. Okay. Strength and dignity are her garb, and she looks smiling toward the future. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She watches over the conduct of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise and acclaim her, her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have performed worthily, but you surpass them all.
Oh, two more, two more.
Oh, thank you. Charm is deceptive and beauty is not. A God-fearing woman is the one to be praised. Give her praise for her accomplishments, and let her deeds bring her praise at the city gates.
Wow. So there's a lot of different things a lot of different qualities that were mentioned. And we're going to learn tonight. I was reading this after I was reading some of the stories that we're gonna learn about tonight, and it really seems like the verse is describing these people in different ways. So it's very, very, very nice things. So now, before we start with the stories, so we're gonna read a few more quotes about the unique qualities of a woman in Judaism. So actually, I think most of these quotes are actually from the Rebbe. And the Rebbe was, well, I guess, was very strong about this, about how women should, of course, in Judaism, women are always at home. That was their main focus. They didn't go out too much. But the Rebbe would always, of course, he didn't downplay that, but he also wanted, in whichever ways that it would not compromise the home, the woman should also utilize her talents and outside the home. So let's read it. Let's read text number 2. This is from Rabbi Schneerson. I guess David.
Rabbi Menachem and Schneerson, who worked Kodesh, volume 19, page 777. Our forefathers Jacob arrived in a foreign land where he endured tough times and trial. Nevertheless, he was not deterred by any difficulties. To the contrary, Jacob successfully established the Jewish people in the foreign environment with all his children and fulfilled the tradition of the forefathers. This is only possible thanks to the Jewish mothers Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, and Zoe, who did everything in their part to ensure the integrity of their home and the future of their people. This is the deeper significance of the concept of the Jewish woman and the mainstay of the home. Not only of the individual household, but also of the family constitution.
Very interesting. So the Rebbe is kind of making it I guess, a play on words. We see how the expression is that the woman is the mainstay of the home, but the home is not only just that home; it expands. It's our whole nation is her home. So, and the Rebbe is kind of taking an example back from back from our four mothers. Two of them are from the four mothers. The wives of Jacob, they ensure the future of the entire nation.
It's interesting. Sort of suggests a need for a definition of what home is.
Right. Yeah, generally in I guess in Hebrew, the home refers to like the family and the whole nation. It's the family.
So the family is the home.
Right. So the whole nation really is we're all one big family. Here's another one. Text 3 is another one from the Rebbe, also in different words, but also making the point that women have to use their influence. Steve, would you like to read number 3?
Feminine influence, the Rebbe Mitchiam Ham Schneidson Barat and up 57:13, page 100. Jewish women have a unique calling to guide others to love and cherish Judaism. This calling begins at home with their own families. Every Jewish woman has a responsibility and obligation to devote herself to a spiritual well-being on her family using her unique feminine qualities and kindness and compassion. She had the ability to provide the appropriate literature to each member of her family, guiding them and drawing them close to the Torah. The Baal Shem Tov taught that all the Jews are like brothers and sisters belonging to a single family. It therefore follows that this guidance should extend beyond one's nuclear family until it reaches the entire Jewish people.
Wow, so it's exactly what we were saying before. The family is not just my brothers and sisters, you know, the few people that I grew up with, but it's the whole family, the whole nation. And the Rebbe is putting that responsibility over here. It's putting that responsibility on the woman primarily because she's the one who takes care of the family. She does a better job at that.
There's another perspective I was noticing lately.
Mhm.
On the internet, and have a lot of Jewish women coming on and various speeches about. I get the feeling whether she's a mother or not, a mother.
Right, right.
She's saying things that warm us up, that comfort us.
Yeah, it's in the, you know, men have the characteristics of being men, and women have a characteristics of being mothers. It's whether they are mothers or not. That's who they are. The Rebbe believes very strongly in that.
And there's one rabbi that I listen to a lot, who says that women and men cannot, not survive. Cannot live
Together.
Well, the idea is that there's a difference between a woman, man's wife.
Oh, interesting.
But yeah, a woman can't think at all. Right, well, we get along together. Yeah, but there's also contempt. Yeah, because familiarity breeds contempt. But the idea is, if the household only had love, dependent on love, the marriage would last. But then there are other things that hold it together.
Right. Okay, so with that introduction in mind, so we can start with some very fascinating stories. We're going to learn about 3 women. We're going to focus on 2 of them. So let's start with the first one. So it says on the screen, it's written Donna Gracia. She had many names. This woman, even Donna Gracia was not her full name. Her full name was Donna Gracia Mendez Nasi. And she also had that was considered her Jewish name. She also had a non-Jewish name, which I don't remember now. So this is she's a pretty famous woman. You might have heard of her before. So let's just paint the background. So we're going back to the period of the expulsion from Spain, back in that time, but we spoke about it last week. So in 1492, the King of Spain, or whatever it was, expelled
King Ferdinand.
Ferdinand, okay,
Yeah.
expelled all
Including-
Jews from Spain. So a lot of them went, or most of them, I don't know the numbers, a lot of them went to Portugal, which is right there. They moved to Portugal. But within a few years, the same thing happened in Portugal, and in a way, it was even worse. Because it wasn't just about, they weren't expelled, they were given a different kind of choice. They were given a choice, either convert or be killed. That was pretty much the choice. So in this period, this is where this woman is born. She was born apparently in the year 1510. So her parents had actually grown up in Spain, and then they fled to Portugal. So they lived in Lisbon, and they had what many Jews did then is they kind of openly accepted another faith, but deep down they still considered themselves Jewish. They didn't they still kept their faith in Judaism, they weren't able to practice it that much because if it would be open, they would get caught. So it was kind of very secretive, but they could still consider themselves Jews, and a lot of them eventually escaped and were able to practice Jewish life again in the open. So this girl was born in such a family in the year 1510, so it's already about almost 15 years of this, Inquisition style thing. Her parents are, as we called, Marranos. They're secret Jews, and she actually grew up in she was part of a wealthy family, a very wealthy family. Eventually, she grew up and she married also another man. Actually, they say that the person who she married was actually her uncle. She married her own uncle, also a very, very, very wealthy man, and she had a very, very colorful life, as we'll see as we go along. But let's start with text 4. So this is this is not specifically written about her, but this is describing some of the background of the time period in that place. So
Now, before we start on that, were Jews permitted to marry uncle to a niece back then?
yeah, it is permitted. It's only that way though. A nephew cannot marry his aunt, but an uncle could marry his niece. It's from the Torah. It's clear in the Torah. The Torah prohibits only one way, but not the other way.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to read text number 4. I'm not going to read all the descriptions, but it's from some book which was written back then. Someone is describing the history. So here we go. Once King Manuel obtained the crown, he did not wait long to torment me. Me, I guess, means the Jewish people. He soon proclaimed that all Jews in his kingdom must become Christians or leave Portugal within a stipulated period. That was the ultimatum. This proclamation greatly saddened all my children, for their hearts told them that my enemy wished to perpetrate an evil greater than exile, and they determined to leave. Since they had lost their lands, they gathered the rest of their belongings as best they could in this short time and prepared to leave. But when the king realized the Jews' resolve and how little they seemed to mind exile in preference to changing their religion, he revealed his evil intent. He commanded all Jews in the kingdom to assemble in Lisbon, brooding, I guess it's some sort of, I don't know, I'm not familiar with that word, spreading reports that he would there provide them with ships. But as soon as he had gathered them, he had them herded into a large buildings called Ostastos, something like that. Forgive me for my Spanish. And when he had corralled them like sheep prepared for the slaughter, he at last exposed his venomous character and announced that all were to become Christians and that they should do out of love what they would otherwise have to do by compulsion. These threats were not sufficient to make my children turn their backs to God. Instead, they answered resolutely that they would not comply with his request. Finally, the king commanded that food and drink be withheld from them for 3 days to try them with anguish of hunger, but this they likewise courageously endured. The king realized that even this was insufficient to change them, and that if he starved them any longer, they would perish. Dragging some by their legs and others by their hair and beards, punching and mauling them, his men brought them to the churches where the waters of baptism were thrown upon them. As a result of this violence, contrary to divine and human laws, the bodies of many Jews were made Christian, but no stain ever touched their souls. Instead, they kept forever impressed upon them the seal of their ancient law. Okay, I'm going to continue just the next piece. Text number 5 is kind of continuation, which I guess it's a few pages later in that book, but it's describing how these so to speak new conversos, these new Jews who were now forcibly converted, what do they actually look like? So that's what it describes in text 5. I guess we're back to Lee.
Okay. I looked up brooding while you were doing that. It means spreading rumors. I haven't heard that word before either.
Yeah, interesting.
Okay. Once King Manuel I obtained the crown, he did. Wait, that's the one we
The
just
next
read.
one, this one.
Number 6, right?
Yeah, but number 5 here.
Oh, that one. Okay. The new Christians had become immersed in power and in deceits. They had nearly forgotten their ancient faith and lost the fear of the fountain whence our life flows because of the vast riches and the status of and rank they were acquiring in the new kingdom. They now felt secure in their imitation of the Christians, though they never exchanged the secret of their souls. So that meant they stayed Jewish, correct?
Yeah, so they consider themselves still Jewish, but they're very limited in what they were actually able to practice. I mean, they had to go to church, and they couldn't go to synagogue. It had to be very secretive. And it eventually wasn't right away, but eventually there was the Inquisition, and they started doing investigations and catching people. And if they caught Jews, they were dead meat. Literally, they were roasted. So they had to be very careful. I mean, it didn't have the Inquisition. That kind of investigation didn't start right away. It took a few years for that, so it kind of got worse. Okay, so that was it seems like from a more of a secular source, more like history book. But here we have text number 6. This is actually from a rabbi in his responsa. So rabbis would, people would write halachic questions to rabbis, and they would respond at length, the whole, scholarly discussion. They would give their response, and a lot of them were printed. So that's what these responses look like. So here we have text number 6 is from the Shut Maharitats. That's the name of that rabbi. So this is what he writes about the women the Jewish women during this period. Yeah, David, text number 6.
The Jew trade is embedded in the hearts of the righteous women of the country. They instruct the men and employ them close to the Jew trade, as we have heard and witnessed.
Okay, so as we'll soon see, I think one example, a beautiful example of this is going to be our star of the show, this woman, Donna Gracia. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. I hope. Sounds good, right? Donna Gracia. So she actually got married at a young age. I think it says she was 18 when she got married to her uncle. Again, they're very, very wealthy. Actually, in other words, her husband and his brother had a very, very successful banking firm. And they were all over. They were connected all over the world. It was massive. They're very, very wealthy. And eventually, at one point, they opened up office in Antwerp, in Belgium, which is just a little north from Portugal. And at that point, once they had an office there, so they decided this woman with her husband decided to actually, before that happened, so she was married to her husband, I believe, for 7 years, and her husband passed away. So she had one child. She had a daughter. Then her husband passed away. She's a young woman with no husband. So, but eventually her brother-in-law, in other words, her husband's brother, was still running the business. She actually inherited half of the business. So she suddenly she's a single woman, and she's extremely wealthy suddenly. And together with her brother-in-law, they decided to move out of Portugal. She wanted to be Jewish, and it was too difficult in Portugal. Everything was secret. So she decided to move to their new office in Antwerp. And once she was there, she started, even over there, it wasn't so easy to be Jewish. It was easier, but she still had to be careful. But already then, she started organizing escapes. And she, probably they say thousands of Jews managed to escape Portugal, which they weren't allowed to do then. It was kind of illegal, but she managed to have them escape. And it was a whole operation. I mean, one of the businesses that her brother-in-law, and I guess her husband before he passed had was they were like merchants. They dealt with spices apparently there was some sort of new route that was recently discovered, like a sea route from Spain to India, and they did a lot of trade. So because of that, they had all these ships. So that's what they used for smuggling Jews. They would, I mean, it was a whole operation. They would smuggle Jews out onto their ships. They had, in the middle of the night for small groups at a time. And then they would bring them over to Antwerp. From Antwerp, I think I don't remember the exact route, but at some point they would walk by foot over the mountains. That was pretty dangerous. I mean, people died on those trips. And eventually they went from there, they got to Germany, I think, and then from there to Venice. I don't know if that makes sense on the map. But I think from Venice, and that they left from Venice and they made it to, I guess, to Greece or Turkey, places where it was more at that time, those countries, the Ottoman Empire was Islam at that point, which was very open to Judaism, and very, very nice to Jews. There were a lot of big Jewish communities there, and it was a very good place for Jews. So this entire operation was organized by this woman, this young widowed woman, and she had the money for it, so she funded the whole thing, or a big part of it. And in her merit, many Jewish people and their families managed to make it out. And text number 7, we're actually going to read about this. This is back to that history book we mentioned before, we read from before. So text number 7 has some more details. Steve, would you like to read?
Jamel Yuske, Marty Cohen, Kosovo, as the Bugios as Israel, Consolation and the Circulations of Israel, Philadelphia Jewish Publication Society, 1966, page 230. Has God mercy ever appeared to anyone in human garb? It has appeared to you to help you with your troubles. Has anyone ever seen a woman risk her life to save her brother? As if she inherited Miriam's innate compassion, or governed her people with Deborah's remarkable prudence, and aid in the persecuted with Esther's boundless virtue and surpassing piety, or free and besieged from the anguish like the chastity and gracious widow Judith, a woman of true-hearted courage. The LRD, the Lord has sent you such a woman in our own days from the supreme choir and his hosts. He has treasured all these virtues in a single soul. To your happy fortune, to choose and infuse them in delicate and chastised person of the blessed Jewish Garcia Nasi. Her inspiration greatly encouraged her needy children in Portugal who were too poor and weak to leave the fire and to undertake a lengthy journey. She generously provided money and other needs for comfort to the refugees who arrived. Desolate and seasick, Spartacus and Flanders and elsewhere. She helped them overcome the rigorous and craggy
Alps.
In Germany and other lands. She hastened to alleviate the miseries caused by the hardship of the hazards of their long journey. Thus, with her golden hand and angelic purpose, she lifted up the majority of our people in Europe from the abyss and to the hardship, and countless others where poverty and sin had hurled them. He continued to guide them until they were in safe land, until she had returned them the obedience and the precepts of the ancient King God.
Wow. So a lot of praise is heaped upon this woman. She did a lot of good a lot of good things while she was there in Antwerp. Eventually, she moved, and she lived in many different places throughout her life. So eventually, she moved to Italy, I believe. She was in Venice for a while, and then she moved a little bit north to northern Italy, then back to Venice. There's a lot of things going on. I mean, first of all, because of her position, her, because of her wealth, she had connections with, the whole world, with all the big, kings and pope and what's that?
She knew people like.
Yeah, she had really had those connections. I mean, she did a lot of, if it took a good bribe to bribe some official or to some prince, to help Jews, she was the one who made that happen. She had the connections, she had the money. Eventually her brother-in-law also passed away and basically left her with the entire wealth, everything. So she had the whole business and all the wealth, and she was probably one of the wealthiest people, one of the wealthiest people in Europe at the time.
And she didn't remarry?
I don't think she remarried, no.
That's because all the men she talked to, she had to speak to twice before they listened to her.
Eventually she got into there was different inheritance disputes, so she had to those were some of the reasons why she moved. I'm not sure exactly how that helped, but she moved around, so that's why she moved from Venice to to northern Italy. She moved back and forth. There's also there was a certain different kings were trying, everyone's trying to get her wealth. So there was a certain king that was trying to get one of his relatives from his royal family to marry her daughter. That way he'll get an in and be able to take some of that. So that was another whole ordeal she had to go through to prevent that. Eventually, she ended up moving out of that part of Europe, and she moved to, she moved to Constantinople, as it was called back in those days. I think today it's in Greece.
Turkey,
one of those two.
Yeah, Turkey, I think. They changed the name
Yeah.
to a Muslim name now.
Yes, remember the king.
Right, it sounds similar, right? Similar concept. Lee, you said it's in Turkey?
I believe so. I think that when the Muslims became more powerful, though, they changed all the Christian names. That was one of the Christian names to, let me ask my friend Siri, she knows. Hey Siri, what's Constantinople called today?
Okay, I found this on the web for what Wisconsin-Nopa called today. Check it out.
Forget it. Usually she's pretty fast, that Siri lady, but
Yeah, you just have
not
to turn it on. So here in let's actually read text number 8. Here we have another historian who writes, we're gonna read a little piece of it, who writes about the impression that this woman made when she showed up in Constantinople. So
it's called Istanbul.
Okay.
Istanbul.
Turkey,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Okay. So there was a big Jewish community there. There was a lot going on, and at this point already, I think once Donna Gracia had arrived to Italy, I believe that was when she already openly was observing Judaism, in the most open way. And not only was she observing Judaism, but she was helping others to do that and encouraging others to do that. As we read earlier, the previous reading that we read was how she, was sad for helping people, to escape, but she was also encouraging them in their observance, in their Judaism. So text number 8 is going to tell us what it looked like when she arrived to her next stop. So here we go. 1553, an old Portuguese woman, Gracia Mendicea Nasi, it's her full name, came to Constantinople from Venice with her daughter and servants. The Jews are very proud of her. They call her a senora. Senora, yeah. She lives also in luxury and extravagance, has many servants, Maids also among them 2 from the Netherlands. She is said to have been formerly a Marrano and here to have become a Jewess again. The senora whom I have mentioned and her son-in-law, so eventually her daughter did marry once they arrived to Turkey. Yeah, and her son-in-law live in such state that it would amply befit a prince. They feed about 80 people a day. Must have cheated people somewhere. That's the impression. If people thought she was so rich, must have cheated someone. Something must be wrong with them. They allege to have left a lot of wealth behind them. Also, that some is following them on the sea. And considering the cost of living in Turkey, their wealth will soon shrink here. They gave the pashas, that was the Muslim leaders, they gave the pashas a lot and distributed several thousand ducats to the poor Jews or their hospital. All right, so here we're seeing about, their style of living. They're definitely living. This Mrs. Dona Gracia Mendez Nasi was living very, very wealthy lifestyle, but she was also sharing. She was sharing with other Jewish people. It says she was feeding 80 people a day. I guess I'm assuming that some of those people were, charity cases. She was, distributing a lot of charity. Very interestingly, at one point, I believe it was the Pope, did something like he killed a few Jews or something, burned them alive, and she wanted to make a statement. She was very upset about it. Everyone was upset about it. How could such a thing be done? So she was the one who organized a boycott on it's called the port of Ancona or something like that. She was the one who organized that port. That's the effect of her, her influence and her connections. She was able to make that happen. Actually, I want to pause for a second. Let's show some of these slides. So this is not directly connected to the woman we're discussing, but it's connected to the Inquisition or the concept of Marranos. So this, what we're looking at, is pictures of corresponding pages. It's Hebrew and Spanish. This is actually a prayer book that was printed in Amsterdam. Amsterdam was, and back in those days, in the 1500s, Amsterdam was a lot of the Jews that managed to escape Spain and Portugal moved to Amsterdam, and we mentioned this actually last week. They made printing presses there, and so they printed this beautiful prayer book. So what we're looking at here is, I'll read it in Hebrew, Hashkavas Hasurufim al Kiddush Hashem. It's a prayer to be said when someone is burnt for sanctifying God's name. There's a special prayer for it, and that was part of their book, because that was what they went through. So this is just something interesting, just to you have kind of a live artifact of this story. This one is not showing. Give me 1 second. So let's reload the page. Let's figure this out. Let's reload this page.
That's one you just did, right?
Yeah. Hopefully it should work now. There we go. So I want to make it full screen. There it is.
Dona Gracia.
So this is, it looks like it might be a tombstone. It's not a tombstone. This is just a monument in Israel. There's a monument for this woman that we're learning about. Mitzpeh Dona Gracia means it's like an overlook. This overlook looks like it's near. Maybe that's the lake.
Tiberias?
That might be where it is. I'm not sure.
Because I think so. I read somewhere that she bought something at Tiberias. She contributed.
Yeah. We're gonna get to that. Yeah.
So that's 500 years later, huh?
So 500 years since we mentioned she was born in 1510. So here in 2010, 500 years after she was born, they set up this monument. So yes, it's a living legacy. I mean, it's not alive, but it's evidence of her life.
Does that say something about Holland? 500 Hollandet?
About what?
After the 500, is it Le Hollandet?
Oh, Holodossa means her birth.
Ah, okay. So 500 years after her birth.
Yeah. So here, this is another thing that connected to what you were mentioning. So this is, if you could read it, it says on the sign, this is a big building. It says Dona Gracia Hotel. This is actually in Tveria. It's a building that's there. It's a hotel. It's a functioning hotel. Inside, there's actually a small museum about her life in this hotel. And we'll see soon what the connection that she had to the city of Tveria. Tveria is in the north of Israel. It's actually a beautiful city. It's right on the lake.
Yeah.
So it's like on a hillside. It's like the whole entire city is on a steep mountain, and it's overlooking the beautiful lake, right on the border of I guess Jordan. Actually, there's a lot of great rabbis that are buried there. For example, Maimonides, who we always love to quote here, he's buried in Tveria. Many other sages. Okay, anything else? Oh yeah, this is already the next one. Okay. Let's move back to this. So here we have, let's go to text 9. Yeah, let's start with this one, text 9. This is our last one about this woman. I think it's Lee's turn again.
Okay. At the time we left Jerusalem, I heard from Portuguese Jews about a Portuguese Jewish woman who had escaped that kingdom with a great deal of property, and who had thus become very powerful and had great name in those countries. She bought this city of Tiberias from the Sultan for the price of a large sum of money and payment of a perpetual tax of 1,000 cruzados per year, and that next summer she and all her family will leave Istanbul to live there, and together with her all the Jews who will be following her. Upon hearing this news, all of the Jews who live in the land of Israel are full of great happiness, for they hope that if these people come and settle here, the Mashiach will come.
Oh, so this is like it's almost like a Zionist concept. Some people actually connect it. They say that she was the first Zionist in a way because she bought a city. She bought a whole city. At that time, there was nothing really going on there. I mean, in Israel in general was very kind of desolate. It was under at that time it was under the Ottoman Empire, so it was under the same rulership as Turkey. Is the same, where she had been living. It was the same rulership. But that city of Tiberias was pretty. There's nothing really there. It wasn't really much of a city. I mean, at least not at that point. There's no one really living there. But she bought the city and she started developing it, and she settled Jews there. I mean, we know stories. There were Jewish communities there. There's all kinds of stories. I mean,
She was kind of like Moses in a way, the female Moses. I don't know if that's a good example, but
a little different. So she didn't teach that much, but yeah, she helped people in massive ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a very nice example of, as we say, a woman of valor. She really uh she really did she pulled all the strings and she really did a lot. Okay. We have here one more text. And this is again not about the woman we're talking about. This is again from the Rebbe, but again the Rebbe is describing another interesting point that it's connected more to the time period where there's a lot of Jewish people in her time. It's even she herself grew up, spent a portion of her life in that situation where she was Jewish, but she was not able to practice Judaism. So here we have the Rebbe talk to that. Text number 10. Back to you, David. You see 10? to make page numbers next time. Make it easier to find.
Here it happens.
Okay.
The inner spark of the Jewish consciousness. Telling you. Was present and complete in all Jews, regardless of their external conditions or circumstances. However, we work for awakening its inner core within ourselves and others, so that it should become revealed, influencing and guiding all particulars of the Jewish women play a particularly important role in this famous course of divine providence. Hence, in the ground, Jewish women hold special qualities. Women are bound to greater, more expressive qualities of the sensitivity and limit. They are therefore associated with awakening and revolt in inner feeling to be true and living to possess. Love for God, love for God, and for people.
Beautiful. Yeah, so again, I guess this is connected to the woman we discussed. She also encouraged her fellow Jews in, embracing Judaism once again, right? Practicing Judaism. And this is specifically a quality, this is something which women excel. They're more sensitive to these the inner soul, the inner part of the Jew. Even if he's not behaving, if he's not practicing it, the woman is sensitive to that inner part. Okay, so we're gonna stop there. I mean, there's a lot more to say, and I don't remember all the details. I read so much about this woman. I mean, even until today, there's still people still talk about it. There's streets named after her, and there's different organizations. She's still, I mean, even though we're talking about 500 years ago, she still has an impact. But let's move on to a different time. So we're moving forward. I think it's a little bit later in history. Maybe it's a century later, but it's a different area as well. So we're not talking about Spain anymore. We're talking about Europe. We're talking about Russia now. More particularly, we're talking about Ukraine. Now, today it's in Ukraine. So we're zooming into the city of Lvov. And here we have a woman named Rebbetzin Bela Katz. This is it almost sounds like it could be a modern name because, modern Ashkenazic name would sound exactly the same, even though it's 500 years back, it was the same names were going on. So this woman, Bela Katz, the way to identify her was really to talk about her husband. Her husband was a very famous rabbi. He wrote different books. He wrote different books on Jewish law. Most particularly, he wrote a book called in Hebrew it's called Sefer Meirat Einayim, which means the book which lights up the eyes. We know it for short. The acronym for that is Semeh. We call it the Semeh, and it's a commentary on one of the 4 sections of the Code of Jewish Law. Specifically, it's the section which talks about monetary things, legal claims, courts, testimonies, and most of it is like monetary things. When could you make a monetary claim? When documents. It's a very, very complicated area in Jewish law. It's between the 4 sections of the Jewish law, 4 sections of the Code of Jewish Law. That's by far the most complex. He wrote the commentary. I mean, there's 2 primary commentaries that are learned until today. So he's one of them. But what's really fascinating is that his wife was also a very special woman, and she's spoken about. So the way we know about her is mainly from her son. So she had 3 sons. Her middle son, his name was Rabbi Yosef Yuzpo, and he actually later, my understanding is that he published his father's works. So we mentioned earlier the Semeh, that was one of his works, but he had another work called the Drisha Prisha in Hebrew. And in the introduction, so the son wrote an introduction to that when he published it. In the introduction, he wrote a tribute to his own mother. So let's read about that.
I think person, mother,
Bela, wow, okay. I guess I learned about your mother.
Hmm.
Okay, this is text number 11. Yeah, we're holding by Steve's turn.
Rabbi Yosef, Yitzchak Katz, Introduction to Bereshit, Bereshit, and Torah Dava. I cannot refrain from committing to writing the account of the many wonderful qualities of the distinguished, modest, devout, and righteous woman, my mother, my teacher, Rabbi Zen Bela, the daughter of the community leader and philanthropist, Rabbi Israel, elder of the blessed memory. Her radiant splendor and her glory were not ours alone, but belonging to all the people and her generation. She was as beautiful as the moon, pure and a glory to all the daughters of Israel. The woman saw her and acclaimed her pleasant deeds, and she guided them to a proper path. She is therefore deserving of the honor of, and to have some of her good deeds recorded in the writings. This will preserve her memory for future generations, so that all Jewish women may learn from her and emulate her.
Wow, beautiful. So she was a woman who, besides for caring for her own family, taking care like a good Jewish mother, taking care of her children, raising her children, she was constantly working. She was always doing good things and helping others, and extremely devoted. She was always giving from herself. And we're going to read in the next quote some of her schedule, but she really, she worked, she didn't let herself enjoy life. She fasted many times, which is, it's something that you would hear a rabbi do, but to hear a rebbitzin, to hear a rabbi's wife, fasting that's very unique. And she was also very knowledgeable. She studied a lot of Torah, and we're going to see soon there are actually some rulings in Jewish law that we follow because that's what she decided. We follow her opinion. That's the extent of her knowledge. So let's look at text 12. This is again a continuation of that same introduction. So I'm going to read. You know what? Let's we have 4 left. So I'm going to ask Lee.
Okay. All of her days, both in winter and summer, she always rose early, several hours before dawn, and prayed at length with great devotion. She held the key to the women's section of the synagogue and was the first to arrive and the last to leave. She would remain in the synagogue 1 or 2 hours after everyone else had left, completing her prayers and supplications. After her prayers, she did not indulge in any idle matters. She went on to study Torah, reading the weekly Torah portion with Rashi's commentary, as well as other commentaries. This is all well known to all of my father's students who ate at our table. Whenever they discussed Torah matters at the meal, she would join the discussion like one of the students. She would occasionally come up with original interpretations that were as sweet as honey. She was especially knowledgeable in the laws pertaining to women. She always devoted her mind and heart to understanding the reasons behind the Torah's laws.
As I find that interesting that she joined the discussion whenever there was Torah discussions around the table. Usually the Jewish mother, when it comes to let's say a Shabbat dinner or Shabbat meal, a holiday meal, she's usually very active in serving the meal. The discussion, especially if it's a deep Torah discussion, usually she's less involved. That's not her expertise. But I found it interesting that this woman, Rebbitzin Bela, she was not only involved, but she also contributed. She had her own original thoughts. That's very unique. Okay, so now we're gonna learn about her ruling and her halachic ruling that that she, thanks to her, we follow. So just to give a little bit of background, so usually every time we do a mitzvah, we make a blessing. We make a blessed are you, God, Baruch atah Hashem, right? And thank you for helping us to do this mitzvah, whatever the mitzvah is. So usually, as a general rule, the mitzvah always the blessing, the bracha, is always recited before the mitzvah. It's generally the way it works. However, there's certain exceptions, and it's mainly because of technical reasons that sometimes it has to be changed around. And one of them is when women light the Shabbat candles on Friday night. So in that case, they light the candles first and then say the blessing. Then what's the reason for that? Why is that done? Why do I have to change the standard? Change the default? So the reason is because as soon as they say the blessing, thank you, blessed are you, Lord our God, who sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to light the candles of the holy Shabbos. That's the wording of the blessing. As soon as they say the blessing, it's now Shabbos. They have just accepted Shabbos, and now they have to observe all the laws of Shabbos starting from now, even if it's still a few minutes before sunset, right? It's still 18 minutes.
There's some actions that say, why did you live before the blessing?
Exactly. So we're going to talk about that. So why do we? Now the thing is, on Shabbos, you're not allowed to light a flame. So if I say the blessing, that means I accepted Shabbos, and now I can't light the candle anymore. So just because it wouldn't work any other way, so when the order had to be changed. So before they light the candles, instead of making the blessing before, they first light the candles and then they make the blessing afterwards. Now, in order to still, we still try to, as much as possible, have the blessing before the action. So for that reason, they cover their eyes. In other words, they don't benefit from the light right away, and only once they're done the blessing, they uncover their eyes, and now they're starting to benefit from the light. So the blessing is kind of still, in a way, it's still before the action. Right? The candles were lit already, but they haven't benefited from it until after the blessing.
Similar to the Shema, I think, right? They'll be covered.
Right. Different reason, but yeah. Not on Shabbos, on holidays. Oh, so as we're going to learn, on holidays, it was usually, up until Rebbetzin Bela, the same process was practiced on the holidays. That even though usually we try to make the blessing before, on the holidays, they would do the blessing afterwards, and first light and make the blessing afterwards. But Rebbetzin Bela came around and said, there's no reason to do that on a holiday. And that's because on a holiday, you are allowed to light a flame. So there's no reason not to do the blessing before. So she was the one who decided that we're going to change it. We're going to do it the way it should be. And that's the way it's done. So let's look at, so we're reading now, text 13 and 14 is 13 is actually from the Code of Jewish Law itself. And then 14 is going to be the kind of her teaching about that. Forgot who are we? Lee read last, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so David for 13.
The blessing over Shabbat, candle lighting, is recited after lighting candles. However, the further requirement that blessing should proceed this way, you would not benefit from the light until reciting the blessing. Therefore, after lighting the candles, we block the candles. Light and recite the blessing. After which we remove the light as a result, the blessing is considered to have been recited with your action.
Right, so that's the way it generally is on a Friday night, on a Shabbos. So here at text 14, we're going to read again. This is from that same introduction from her son, and he describes how his his mother identified this error that was applied to holidays as well. So yeah, Steve for 14.
Rabbi Yosef Garby Katz.
Oh yeah, it's Yuspa. It's typo there.
Introduction to the Berisha of Parsia Yoras Della. Consider this common error that my mother identified regarding the candlelight practice for the festivals. Common practice is to observe the identical order for festivals as it is done in the Shabbat, meaning that the women first light the candles, shield the light with their own hands, recite the blessing, and then remove their hands. This is indeed proper for lighting Shabbat candles, because lighting after the blessing is problematic. On festivals, however, it is permitted to light the candles during the actual festival. It is therefore better to follow the regular blessing, the mitzvah sequence, and to recite the blessing before lighting the festival candles.
Wow, so very interesting.
Rabbi, that would be
Yes.
true for Havdalah as well. For Havdalah, we do the blessing and then light the Havdalah candle, right?
For Havdalah, no, for Havdalah, it could be there's different customs. I would tell you the way I'm used to doing it is that we light the candle before everything, and then we say the blessing over the wine, and then we make a blessing on the candle before we benefit from the light.
Okay,
In
because
a way, it's similar to Friday nights in a way.
Shabbos has to be over before you can light that.
Right, correct.
All right.
And once the candle is lit, why should we not be able to? It's there,
Right, correct.
so it's a lot.
Right. You're talking about the Havdalah candle or the
I'm sorry.
yeah, he was asking about Havdalah. Yeah, the Friday night candles, the whole idea is to benefit from light. That's why we light it. So we should have light in the house. It should be nice.
No problem with that.
Okay, so here we have our last text. Again, this is another continuation of the sun. Talks a little bit more about some of the big good deeds of his mother. So here we go. After her regimen of prayer and Torah study, she would engage in acts of kindness. She would visit the sick, comfort mourners. There was no mitzvah in the city in which she did not involve herself. If there was still time left to the day, she would not be idle. She would spin threads for tzitzis, prepare materials for sewing Torah scroll parchments, and sew talisos and kittel robes. She supervised her household, guiding her children and grandchildren. She also cared for the young students, preparing food for them, repairing their clothes, and arranging for them to be able to bathe before Shabbat. She had no trace of haughtiness and was exceedingly generous with charity even beyond her means. All of her thoughts and deeds were focused on finding mitzvah actions to perform. Very special woman. So actually her husband passed away at a very young age. I mean, he managed to write all those books before he passed, but she was left, as a widow. So in her last years of her life, she moved out of, she was in Lvov, or I'm not sure how it's pronounced, something like Lviv or Lvov, which is today in Ukraine. She moved for the last few years of her life. She moved out and she moved to Israel. She spent her last years in Israel. Let me see what I have here. A few more slides.
Do you have time to ask a question that Karen asked?
Sure.
She wanted to know, when we light the candles, why do the moms go like this instead of just covering their eyes? They move
Like the 3 times?
Yeah.
The truth is, I'm not even sure the answer myself. You have to
Okay.
ask Rebbitzin.
All right. So should I ask your mom or your wife then?
Either one.
Either one. All right.
But you cover it up first and then you
That's this prayer show, right? That's.
Talit, yeah.
The streets.
Yeah, the tzitzis are the strings. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's, strings. So here, it's a little bit hard to see, but this is what I found online. This picture, this is the grave of Bela Katz.
In Israel?
It's in Israel. I understand, or actually, if I might have, my bad. I think this is actually the grave of her husband.
Okay.
So it's
So that's Ukraine?
he was buried in Ukraine. It's a little hard to read, but That's just what I have. Sorry about that. Next we have, okay, this is just a map. This is where Lvov is. It's on the west of Ukraine.
My grandfather was born in Novgorod, right near Kiev.
And
And he called it the Pale. He said Jews were only allowed to live in that one little area. Poland, Ukraine, Russia, Lithuania. It was one little narrow strip where Jews were permitted to live.
here we have a,
Ah, there she goes.
yeah, this is a woman lighting Shabbat candles. It's the artist depiction of the hand covering the eyes. Okay, here, we're going to spend just a minute about this. We don't have any text to read about her, but this is a picture. This is, again, this is not a real picture, but we're talking now about a woman who lived a little bit later on. She was born in the end of the 1600s or the middle of the 1600s. She lived in Germany. I think in Hamburg, or I don't remember exactly, somewhere in Germany. She was known as Glickl of Hamelin. So this picture is actually not her. This is actually her, I think it's her granddaughter or something, who tried to depict. She's kind of dressed up the way she would have imagined her grandmother to look. So she might have looked something like this. This is the closest we could get. So she was also a unique woman. She wrote memoirs in Yiddish. She has a lot of memoirs. So we have it's a very unique work. I mean, they're available. You could buy her memoirs. They're translated. She wrote about Jewish life in Yiddish back, whatever it was, 400 years ago or 350 years ago, and it was back then it was a rare thing to have a woman diaries. It's a rare thing. She had a very interesting life. She also got married at a very young age. I think even at the age of 14, if I'm not mistaken. She gave birth to 14 children. 2 of them passed away at a very young age, but she had 12 children. Her husband also passed away at a young age. Eventually, she remarried. Eventually, she moved in order to her second husband wasn't even from Germany. He was in France. He was in a city called Metz, at the Dodgers and the Mets. So she moved over to France. Her second husband was also wealthy, I believe. But he ended up shortly after their marriage, he ended up losing all his money and then eventually passing away as well. So she was widowed twice, and kind of what kept herself busy was, yeah. There's actually in Jewish law, there's a law that if a woman loses 3 husbands, then it's a danger. It's I don't know if it's a law, but it's like a concept that if 3 husbands die, then you got to stay away from that woman. But generally, three is the 3. If something happens 3 times, that's considered like the standard. But yeah, so she managed to raise all of her children. She raised 12 children, two marriages, and I'm trying to remember what else there is. But she was a Jewish woman, and she wrote Yiddish memoirs. They're one of the reasons, the main reason that she writes. Why did she write all these memoirs? Was because she wanted her children to know what it's like what Jewish life is like. She was worried, if they might have no idea what it's like. So that was her main reason why. Of course, it also helped her, in her loneliness, between marriages. But so that's about that woman. What else do I have here? Maybe I have one more picture or something. Oh no, that's it. That's the last one. Okay. So the main thing is we should all take lessons from the woman of valor. And of course, the women should do what they excel at, but we should at least take a lesson and try to emulate at least a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's it. Keep up making the world a better place. Keep it up.
Yeah.
All right. And one more time.